Hey, everybody, it is Matt Weaver here with Bible Truth Project. And man, it has been a while. It has been a couple months since I interviewed Dr. Widener in the last episode that I published. A lot has happened, so my apologies. I think I've said this probably several times before, but unfortunately, I kind of get pulled in different directions in life, and that's what happened. That's why I've been absent. So we had a big thing at church that there was an event and then also a big upgrade, equipment upgrade that I was involved with. I'm the tech director there. So that kept me busy for a while. And then we had some sickness and with the kids and everything. And next thing you know, here we are in January and it's been months. So my apologies. It is wintertime here. So hopefully that will help me put out some new content. But I wanted to discuss a subject that I know I've talked about in different kind of in facets, but I never actually took a deep dive on it, and that is the Olivet Discourse, also known as the Little Apocalypse. And I look at this event. Is that the right word? Yeah, that's the right word. Event that took place on the Mount of Olives with Jesus and his disciples as one of the pivotal sections of Scripture to understand prophecy. There's a lot of prophetic interpretations out there. There are different systems of interpretation, a lot of different ways that people will slice it and dice it. But when you really want to at least hear from Jesus on the subject, you turn to the Olivet Discourse. It is the most um, in-depth teaching that he gave on the subject of the last days in with what we have in the Bible. Now you'll find that in Matthew 24 and 25, Mark 13, and Luke 21. Those are the three places that you'll find this. But anyway, let's dive right into it. We're going to start in Matthew 24. I'm actually going to just go a couple verses before as I walk through this whole scenario. So if we come up here, there's a lament and woes that Jesus gives to the Torah scholars, Pharisees, and the scribes. Um, and that is basically it's part of the equation when you understand later what's going on. We're going to start in chapter 23, verse 1. Then Yeshua, and just for reference, I'm using the TLV, so it'll have some Hebrew words in here or Hebrew-ish words. That's great for context, I believe. Then Yeshua spoke to the crowds and his disciples, saying, "The Torah scholars and Pharisees sit on the seat of Moses, so whatever they tell you, do and observe. But don't do what they do, for what they say they do not do. They tie up heavy loads, hard to carry, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves aren't willing to lift a finger to move them. All their works they do to be noticed of men. They make their tefillin, which is their like phylacteries, wide, and their tzitzit or tzitziot long. They love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues, greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called rabbi by men. But you are not to be called rabbi, for one is your teacher, and you are all brothers. And call no man on earth your father, for one is your Father who is in heaven. Nor are you to be called teachers, for one is your teacher, the Messiah. But the greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. But woe to you, Torah scholars, Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut people out of the kingdom of heaven. For you do not enter yourselves, nor do you let those enter who are willing to go in. Woe to you, Torah scholars and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel all over the land and sea to make one convert and become one. And when he becomes one, you make him twice as much the son of Gehenna as yourself. Woe to you, blind guides! You say, whoever swears by the temple, it is nothing. But whoever swears by the gold of the temple, he is obligated. O fools, blind ones, which is greater, the gold of the temple that made the gold, which is greater, the gold or the temple that made the gold holy? And you say, whoever swears by the altar, it is nothing. But whoever swears by the offering on it, he is obligated. O blind ones, which is greater, the offering or the altar that makes the offering holy? Now, I'm going to stop here for a minute because we basically have a section of scripture here, and it seems harsh, especially if you're coming from outside the Christian world, I guess. You would look at this and say, "Wow, this Jesus guy is really kind of angry." You have to understand that the context of the time, there was a lot of hypocrisy in the temple system, and this is something that whether you're a Jewish scholar or a Christian scholar, pretty much everybody understands the tremendous corruption that took place. And some of that is because the high priest was a political figure installed by Rome. He wasn't technically following in the traditions of the priesthood being handed down. And in the world of Judaism, that word wasn't invented until later. The temple was everything. The temple is the center of the faith. It is the center. It's where you worship. There's no church buildings in the first century. There are no churches. There are no small congregations. The only thing they have is synagogues, and synagogues are community centers, but they're not churches. Okay. And so because of the variance there, because of the difference there, the temple was everything to the system. It was everything. If you read the Torah, you'll see that, the Torah focuses on ceremony. It also focuses, of course, on life, but ceremony is very much a part of it. And God wanted his people involved in ceremony. He wanted them involved in worship. He wanted them involved in sacrifice. He wanted them in this stuff. So the temple is central, and as history teaches us, the leadership was corrupt. Some Christians falsely presume that Jesus is ranting over everybody in Israel and the Jewish system as a whole. That's not the case. He is simply pointing out the hypocrisy, and he's targeting Torah scholars and Pharisees, which in this context, him being in Jerusalem, he's speaking about the ruling elite, and he's speaking about the priests in charge of the temple. So if you look at it from that perspective, he is going against the leadership, and he's saying, you guys are corrupt, you're hypocrites. And he tells people to do what they say because they sit in Moses' seat. So he honors the Sanhedrin. He honors the authority that is there and theirs via Torah, but he goes against how they live because they are being hypocritical. They are not actually living out the Torah as God had instructed them. So if you understand that, then you recognize he's targeting his words very directed towards the Torah scholars and Pharisees. And this is important in understanding chapter 24. I think without getting 23 right, you're going to maybe miss the implications of 24. All right, here we go back. Let's see if I can find it here. I made the script bigger so you guys can read it. Okay, verse 23. Woe to you, Torah scholars, Pharisees, hypocrites! You tithe mint and dill and cumin, and yet you have neglected the weightier matters of Torah, justice and mercy and faithfulness. It is necessary to do these things without neglecting the others, O blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. Woe to you, Torah scholars and Pharisees, hypocrites! You clean the outside of a cup and a dish, but inside they are full of greed and uncontrolled desire. O blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish so that the outside may become clean as well. Woe to you, Torah scholars, Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, you which look beautiful on the outside, but inside are full of dead men's bones and everything unclean. And in the same way you appear righteous to men on the outside, but are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, Torah scholars and Pharisees, hypocrites! You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the monuments of the tzedakим, the righteous ones. And you say, if we'd been alive in the days of our forefathers, we wouldn't have been partners with them in the shedding of the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourself that you are the son of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers, O snakes, you brood of vipers. How will you escape the condemnation of Gehenna? Because of this, behold, I am sending you prophets and wise men and Torah scholars. Some of them you will kill and execute at the stake, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city. And so on. You shall come, and so, and this is an important text in this whole context, okay? Upon you shall come all the righteous bloodshed on the earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Amen, I tell you, all these things will come upon this generation. Now, there was a tremendous judgment that took place in 70 AD with Rome destroying the temple and the temple system and everything involved with it. So those words are true. And it was a very, very difficult time. It was a horrible time in Jewish history. But unfortunately, Jewish people have had, just like believers today, we have this awful tendency of walking away from God and denying the word and denying scripture and not accepting his writings and truly following, truly being disciples, which discipleship means leaving everything, if you will, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a metaphor. Leaving everything you are, your identity, what you have, leaving it behind and following the Messiah, following Jesus, following his words. And here he's going after, Torah scholars, Pharisees, hypocrites. He's going after the scribes as well. And if you understand that the Judaism of its day was made up of primarily, of course, you had your scribes, but you had Torah scholars in the temple. You had the Pharisees that were a Jewish sect that lived were based out of the north, but they were, they were a Jewish sect who believed in an oral tradition that was handed down from Moses. Jesus doesn't seemingly uphold the oral tradition, and really goes at the heart of some of the things that the Pharisees have done. But on the other side, you have Sadducees, and Sadducees are a different group who, limit what they believe to the Torah. They don't necessarily accept the words of others. So it is a really complicated time in Israel. And so this kind of condemnation is not unexpected. In fact, there was a community down in Qumran, the Essenes, or the Yachad community, who totally separated themselves from the temple system because they believed it was so corrupt and so defiled. So it was not like Jesus was alone in condemning the leadership of the system. There was whole movements built around this. And I think that's important to understand. Jesus came to cleanse and to redefine, if you will, righteousness and what God was asking for. Us humans do a horrible job of following God's commands. That is our problem that we have had since Adam fell. All right. Now, verse 37, it's very important to understand that Jesus makes this statement. And so upon you shall come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel and the blood of Zechariah. So what's he talking about? Who's he talking about? Well, he seems to be talking to those people groups. Not all of the Jews, just the corrupt leaders. And he's going to hold them accountable for it. And then he says this, O Jerusalem, O Jerusalem. So now he's referencing the city. And he says, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets, stones those sent to her. How often I long to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. I'm going to stop there. That is clearly alluding to the messianic mission that was laid out by the prophets for the shepherd of Israel to gather the flocks together. It is part of Jesus's mission to regather the dispersed of Israel, not just those of the southern kingdom. Obviously, they had all of the it had members of all the tribes present, but also the dispersed Assyrian exiles. And so as he says this, he recognizes his mission. He is to gather. This is part of it. We read this all over the New Testament. Jesus says these things, that he will gather and gather, gather. But it wasn't the time, because they did not discern the time of their visitation. This is how he finishes this. Look, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. In the Hebrew, it's Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And this alludes to a Psalm of David who speaks about this, but he is predicting here that, look, your house is left to you desolate. He's predicting the desolation of the temple. And interestingly enough, this is somewhat predicted in the desolations are decreed in the book of Daniel. Now, we follow up with this in chapter 24, verse 1. Before I get to this little context here, again, we're dealing with Jewish men who had studied with their rabbi, whose core material in life would have been the Torah, the prophets, the writings, okay, the three parts that make up the Tanakh or the Old Testament. They would have lived this and breathed this their entire lives. Okay, so they were very well familiar with the prophecies and with the prophetic expectations that God had laid out in these books. And they also knew that there were desolations decreed based in the book of Daniel. So this is part of this. And so this kind of doom theme, I hate to call it doom, but there's a little bit of trepidation in that Jesus is kind of presenting here that the disciples pick up on. And you'll see this in chapter 24. But you have to remember, the temple is everything. It's been standing since Solomon. It's been, obviously got destroyed in the Babylonian exile, but literally you have 1,000 years, give or take, of temple being a part of the life of the children of Israel. And the destruction of this and the desolation of this is just so hard for them to fathom. It just isn't part of their concept. And I think we as Christians who have never seen a temple, who never engaged with that kind of system, who don't even understand it very well, it's kind of foreign concept. It's kind of like, what's the big deal? Like, it's not a big deal. To them, it's a huge deal. And so we have to understand the centrality of the temple and what it means. Not just the temple, but also the temple leadership in this conversation that's about to take place. And now he says this. Now when Yeshua went out and was going away from the temple, his disciples came up to him to point out to him the temple buildings. Now this means they were walking out on the platform that is around the different inner courts of the temple. And so they're looking around, and this is the statement. "Don't you see all these?" He responded to them. "Amen, I tell you, not one stone will be left here on top of another. Every one will be torn down." And that's true. To this day, there isn't any temple stones left. We don't have anything left from the temple that we can physically see and say, this is a section of wall, this is maybe the outer walls, but nothing of the temple and nothing of the complex of the temple. And this would have just been an unbelievable thought. Like, really? How? Anyway, and as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, so they crossed the valley and went up to the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Yeshua answered them, "Be careful that no one leads you astray." Here's a very interesting observation. The first thing Jesus warns them about, the first thing, when they ask him about all of these things, okay, this calamity, he says, be careful that no one leads you astray. Now, that's important. If you want to hear the heart of Jesus in this whole message, it's warning. Okay, great deception is going to be present. It's a deception that is very challenging to work through. That's the connotation here. First thing, be careful that no one leads you astray. "For many will come in my name." Now, what does that mean? He interprets, saying, "I am the Messiah," and will lead many astray. So one of the fundamental things that he speaks of the last days is false messiahs. You see this pick up in different parts. But false messiahs are very much a part of the last days, and it was also part of that generation. There were many false messiahs even in that time. But it's a principal threat that Jesus lays out, that there will be false messiahs. There are going to be false messiahs. All right? And they will lead many astray, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not alarmed, for this must happen. And if you study Daniel, you kind of get that pattern in Daniel 11, that there's different wars and rumors of wars going on. "For this must happen, but it is not yet the end. For nation will rise up against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines, earthquakes in various places, and all these things are only the beginning of birth pains." So, in other words, there's tremendous travail that's coming to the world. And if Daniel 11 is the picture, which I believe it is, of the last days, you see even several generations of conflict that take place preceding the return of the Lord. I don't know that it all happens at once, but there is conflict that's multi-generational going on before we enter the last days scenario. But it says that these are only the beginning of the birth pains. And then when they hand you over to be persecuted or over to persecution and will kill you, you will be hated by all nations because of my name. Now there's a twofold fulfillment here. In one sense, this took place in the days of the apostles. They were obviously persecuted. But this also speaks of, in Daniel, it does say that there were many that know the truth who will stand their ground and they will be killed for it. So there is this kind of correlation that Jesus is tying to the prophet Daniel, and becomes even more evident as we get down. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. Again, this goes directly related to the book of Daniel and how that ties together. I will show you this after we read through this. And then it says this: many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. Not singular, but many false prophets. Okay. This is not a once and done thing. These are many false prophets. And because lawlessness will multiply, the love of many will grow cold. So anti-law sentiment. But the one who endures until the end will be saved. This good news of the kingdom shall be proclaimed in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. Here's kind of a key text. This is kind of a barometer, a place where you can kind of find the important part of this whole scenario. And that is, he gives a sign which we can look for. When you see the abomination of desolation, which is spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. Then the one on the roof must not go down to take what is in his house, and the one in the field must not turn back to get his coat. Now, in the alternate texts, we read that Jerusalem will be surrounded by armies. And this is part of it, okay? So that it's tied together. Jesus is speaking about armies surrounding Jerusalem, and he's also speaking about abomination of desolation. So a tremendous time of trial for Jerusalem, the city, and obviously an abomination that's taking place in the temple. Woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing in those days. Pray that your escape will not happen in winter or Sabbath, obviously because you're trying to flee. For then there will be great trouble, such as has not happened since the beginning of the world until now, or ever will. And unless those days be cut short, no one will be delivered. But for the sake of the chosen, or the elect in some translations, those days will be cut short. It's important to note that the elect are the Jewish people. They will be delivered, and the prophet Isaiah prophesies that a third will come through the fire and be saved. So it will be a tremendously devastating situation for the Jewish people in those days. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. Again, we get these warnings of messianic figures being around in those days. And then he uses this: false messiahs and false prophets will rise up and show great signs and wonders so as to lead astray even the chosen. And in this context, again, is he talking about Christians? Is he talking about Jews? Well, I think both, okay? I think there is both at stake, really. See, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, look, here he is in the wilderness, do not go out. Or look, here he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For just as lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man. For wherever the carcass is, there the vultures will gather. Now, this whole scene, okay, is speaking of a culmination of trouble that culminates with the abomination of desolation and a time of trouble, a time of pressure, primarily, as I understand it, for Jerusalem and for the chosen people. Okay, chosen, or the elect, meaning the Jewish people. That is what the prophets seem to indicate. Now, will Christians be persecuted? Yeah, of course we will, because we're going to stand our ground as well. But it's primarily speaking about trouble, trial, difficulty, and primarily in Jerusalem. Now we're going to switch over to the other verses. Give me just a second. Okay, so we're going to go to Luke 21. Going to go through the same discussion. There's a little bit different um, information here. Okay. But it's the same story and it just is another layer of information I think it's important to look at. Yeshua looked up and saw the rich men dropping their gifts into the treasury box. He also saw a poor widow dropping in 2 small copper coins. And he said, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all the rest. For all these put in their gifts from the surplus, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on." Now, some were talking about the temple and how it was decorated with beautiful stones and offerings. Yeshua said, "As for the things that you're looking at, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. Everyone will be torn down." And they questioned him, saying, "Teacher, so when will these things happen? What will be the sign that these things are about to take place?" And he said, "Watch out that you're not led astray. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he.' And the time is near." Think of those warnings. Messianic figures saying, the time is near. We're in that generation. The time is near. We're in that generation. Okay. Do not follow them. And when you hear of wars and chaos, do not be terrorized. For these things need to happen first, but the end will not come at once. In other words, it's not just boom. Okay. There's a season that we will begin to see. And continuing telling them, nation will rise up against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, along with famines and epidemics in various places. There will be terrors, along with great signs from heaven. But before all these things, they will grab you, they will persecute you, handing you over to the synagogues and prisons. That's important to note here. He's talking to a Jewish audience. So synagogue is part of the Jewish life ever since the Babylonian diaspora. He's not thinking churches. The Gentile movement hasn't even begun. So this idea that somehow we are the focus of this, I believe, is completely incorrect. He's speaking about especially believing Jews, which to this day, there is a count I just saw the other day. They said it could be up to 1 million Jewish believers in the world. But anyway, it says this, speaking about synagogues, prisons, etc., and leading you away to kings and governors on account of my name. This will lead you to be a witness. So make up your minds not to prepare ahead of time to defend yourselves. For I myself will give you speech and wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to resist or refute. But you will be handed over even by parents, brothers, relatives, friends, and they will put some of you to death. And you will be hated by all because of my name. Yet not a hair of your head will be lost. By your endurance you will gain your souls. But when you see Jerusalem, here's verse 20. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that the desolation is near. So this is the same line where he uses the Daniel's version of the abomination of desolation. That is coinciding with Jerusalem being surrounded by armies. Then those in Judea get out, okay? Flee to the mountains. Those inside the city must get out, and those on the countryside must not enter. For these are the days of punishment to fulfill all that has been written. In other words, this will wrap up Scripture and prophecy, which, by the way, the preterists believe this has all been fulfilled in 70 AD, that we're living in the glorious Messianic age. I'm sorry, if this is the Messianic age in its perfection, it's disappointing. Okay, let's just put that out there. I believe Jesus has way better things in store for us than what this is. And I do not believe preterists are right. I believe they're completely incorrect because I think they don't have the faith necessary to believe that these things will take place in the last days. So there's a little plug against that. All right. Woe to those who are pregnant, to those who are nursing in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath on his people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive into all nations. Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And there will be signs in the sun and moon and stars. Now, what does this mean by there's slavery? Isaiah predicts this as well, that there's captives taken of Jerusalem, and there's a trampling by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles fulfilled. It's not a thousands and thousands of years gap here. This is simply a short season that God allows Jerusalem to be overrun with foreign occupiers, but it doesn't last very long. There will be signs in the sun, moons, and stars, and upon the earth nations will be confused by the roaring of the seas and its waves. People will lose heart from fear in anticipation of what is overtaking the earth, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in the cloud with power and great glory. Now, in this account, he gives us another reference to Daniel as himself as the cloud rider, which was the accusation that he gave or was given him against to Caiaphas, the high priest. And the problem was that he declared himself to be the cloud rider, and at that they said, crucify him. It was that declaration that Jesus said, I am the cloud rider. And so I believe that is the sign of the Son of Man. You will see the Son of Man coming in the cloud. That is the sign. It's not calamity. It's not any of that stuff. It's when we see him coming in the clouds, we know it is coming. All right. Redemption is here. Now, when these things begin to happen, stand straight and lift up your heads, because your salvation is near. Then Yeshua told them a parable. Look at the fig tree. And I'm not going to read all this. It basically just means look at the season. When you see this happen, Jerusalem surrounded with armies, a great deception coming in, Gentiles trampling Jerusalem for a season, tremendous hardship for those who truly believe in the covenant, who believe in the truth, Jew and believer, okay, both of those, because there are Jewish people who will repent and see the error of some of these false messiahs and some of these false messianic figures. It will take place, and we will be in the fire together, if you will. And some people believe in pre-trib rapture. That's a whole other discussion. We can talk about that at a different point. But at the end of the day, this gives us a little bit more data. Now, finally, we're going to look at the Mark account. And this is Mark 13. And let's just look here. As Yeshua was going out of the temple, one of the disciples said to him, Teacher, look, what stones and what buildings. Yeshua said to him, You see these great buildings. Not one stone here will be left upon another. Everyone will be torn down. As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, Jacob, John, and Andrew were questioning him privately. Tell us, when will these things happen? What will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished? Yeshua began to tell them, Watch out that no one leads you astray. Again, the same warning. Many will come in my name, the messianic false messiahs. And by the way, the word often used here in most of the accounts is pseudo-Christos, which is not, which is fake messiahs, okay? Not anachristos, as in anti. Sometimes we use the word antichrist. It's actually better to use the word false Christ. There will be false Christs and false messianic spirits deceiving people. That's specifically what Jesus warns of. That doesn't mean it's of one religion or another. Messianic figures could come technically from any type of religious background. It just means that they are false messiahs. Okay, they promise messianism. They promise redemption, but they are false. They are fake. Okay. He was sitting on the Mount of Olives, out at the temple. Verse 5. Yeshua began to tell him, Watch out that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name saying, I am he, and they will lead many astray. And when you hear of wars, rumors of wars, do not be alarmed, for this must happen, but is not yet the end. For nation will rise up against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. These things are only the beginning of birth pains. Watch out for yourselves. They will hand you over to the courts. You will be beaten in the synagogues. You will stand before governors and kings because of me, as a witness to them. The good news must first be proclaimed to all the nations, and when they arrest you and hand you over, do not worry beforehand what you're to say, for whatever is given to you in that hour, for it is not you who speaks, but the Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit of God. Brother will betray brother to death, father his child. Children will rise up against parents and have them put to death, and you will be hated by all because of my name. But the one who endures till the end will be saved. But when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. The one on the roof must not come down, and the one in the field must not turn back. Woe to those who are pregnant, those who are nursing in those days. Pray that it is not in winter, for in those days there will be trouble such as never happened, not since the beginning of creation, which God created until now and never will. Unless the Lord had shut had cut short those days, no one will be saved. In other words, complete and total annihilation of everybody. But for the sake of the elect, okay, which is the Jewish people in this context, and us as believers who are part of the household, whom he chose, he cut short the days. And then if anyone says, look, here's the Messiah, or look, there he is, do not believe it, for false messiahs, false prophets will rise, show signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, the chosen. So be careful. See, I've told you everything beforehand. But in those days, after that trouble, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will be falling from heaven. This is the classic apocalyptic scene from the prophets and in the book of Revelation. The stars will be falling from heaven, the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And he will send out his angels and gather together his chosen from the four winds of the earth to the end of heaven. All right, so there we have the Olivet Discourse. It's absolutely fascinating and rich and deep scripture. And I wish I'd have time to really do all the parallels. There's tremendous amount of content out there on this, but I look at this series of scriptures, and having studied all the prophets, like you can pick up on where Jesus is directing the thoughts of the apostles. He's directing them to understand some of the conflicts, some of the pandemics, some of the pestilences, the drying of this, just calamity, the raging of the seas, and all kinds of really apocalyptic things will be taking place. But that's not the end. The end is actually when you see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. That marks the end. That marks that this age has come to an end. He will come and he will establish his kingdom as is predicted in the book of Revelation and his own words in some of the other books. So let's go back here to the book of Daniel. We're going to look at Daniel 11. I'm not going to do all of Daniel. It's too much time. But essentially what you find here is a battle between the king of the north and the king of the south. There's a lot of speculation. Has this already been fulfilled in the Seleucids and the Ptolemies? I personally don't believe that's the case. I think if anything, Daniel 8 may have been closer to that. But regardless, if we go back to the end of, kind of towards the end of the chapter, we're going to understand a little bit more of the connection related to what Jesus was referring to. Okay. So verse 29, let's see if this is good enough. Okay. So verse 28, there's a series of conflicts generationally that's going on between these two kings, and the latter set of the kings, I think it's this third set of the kings. The king of the north comes, returns to his own land with great wealth, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant. He will take action and then return to his own land. At the appointed time, he will invade the south again. Only this time, the outcome will not be as before. The ships of Kittim, which are from Cyprus, will come against him, and he will lose heart. He will turn back, then his rage against the holy covenant. When he returns, he will favor those who forsake the holy covenant. And this is an interesting thing. Remember the whole thing with betraying? He will favor those who forsake the holy covenant. His forces will rise up, profane the fortified temple, and they will stop the daily offering and set up the abomination of desolation. So in the series of these wars, okay, he comes back to Jerusalem and something changes. Something changes. Whoever this guy is, whether he is of another religion, but he's a messianic kind of figure, he changes it. He comes against the Holy Covenant. He is against what God is wanting to do. He is against the Torah. He is against the Messiah. He comes and he is going to profane it. And at that point, the temple shows that it would be standing. They will stop the daily sacrifices, and then they will set up the abomination. So the abomination is the signpost, even here in the book of Daniel. Now, this is what happens. With smooth words, he will seduce those who act wickedly against the covenant. Those who reject what God had said to do, he will go after those people. Again, Jesus warns of false messiahs, false prophets, signs, wonders, also the betrayals that will take place. So you can kind of see it ties into what Daniel's speaking of. Those who are wise among the people will instruct many, though for many days they will fall by the sword, or be burned, captured, or pillaged. And when they stumble, they will receive little help, but many will join them deceitfully. Even some of the wise will stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end, for it will still come at the appointed time. So the king will do as he pleases, this ruler, exalting and magnifying himself above every god. This is an important line that we will then look at in the book of Thessalonians. He will speak outrageous things against the God of gods. He will prosper until the time of wrath is completed. For what has been decided will be done. He will show no regard. Sorry, let me give you the verses here. Forgive me. He will show no regard for the gods or of his fathers or the desired by women. He will show, nor will he show regard for any god, but will exalt himself above all. Instead of these, he will honor a god of fortresses, a god his fathers did not acknowledge. He will honor with gold, silver, precious stones, and costly things. He will attack strong fortresses with the help of a foreign god and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him. It kind of seems like he comes in sweet talking, perhaps engages in a form of Judaism of some sort, perhaps, and sways people, but then ultimately reveals himself into something else. We don't know. There's people who believe that he would be a Muslim. He could be a kind of a Vatican-based thing, or it could be a Jewish-based thing. At the end of the day, the Bible doesn't give us details. The Bible gives us details that he will be deceptive, that he will engage kind of all of these people groups, and that probably will seek to change a religion to his own tastes. Okay. Now at the time of the end, the king of the south will attack him, and the king of the north will storm out against him with chariots, horsemen, and ships. And he will invade lands and pass through them like an overflowing river. He will also invade the beautiful land. Many will be overthrown, but these will escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the chief sons of Ammon. In other words, Jordan will somehow escape. He will extend his hand against other countries. The land of Egypt will not escape, and he will gain control. He will gain control over hidden treasures of gold and silver, which could be talking about the wealth of treasure that's down in the Qumran Valley, as written by the Copper Scroll. It's billions of dollars worth of treasure potentially there, as well as all the riches of Egypt, which is billions of dollars. The Libyans, the Cushites, will also be under his feet, but reports from the east and the north will alarm him. These are the wars and rumors of wars, right? And he will set out in great rage to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas and beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will meet his doom with no one to help him. And at that time, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people will arise, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since the beginning of the nation until then. Now, what this arise could mean is that the protection that Michael has given Israel up till this point could be withdrawn, so that this great trouble takes place. But at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise, those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavenly expanse, and those who turn many to righteousness will be like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, close up the word, seal the book until the time of the end. Many will run back and forth, and knowledge will increase. Okay, so you kind of see this, and then there's an interpretation that takes place. And this is what's important to note here. In verse 9, he says, Daniel, go your way, because Daniel has questions. He just doesn't understand everything. And then this whole times time, half a time, and when the breaking of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things will be finished. Okay, so there's this process involved. Actually, let me just read this. That way I'm not skipping anything here. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others stood there, one on his bank of the river, and the one on the other bank, and said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, how long until the end of the wondrous things? Then I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters, as he raised both his right and left hands toward heaven, and swore an oath by him who lives forever, saying, it is for a times and a half. That's where the 3.5 year kind of period that keeps repeating is seen. Then when the breaking of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all of these things will be finished. Now I heard, but I did not understand. So I said, my Lord, what will the outcome of these things? And he said, go your way, Daniel. For the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. In other words, this will not make sense until we get in the last days. It will make sense at that point. Many will be purified, made spotless and refined. Isaiah affirms this. But the wicked will act wickedly. None of the wicked will understand, but the wise will understand. And from the time of the daily burnt offering is taken away and the abomination set up, there will be 1,290 days. Happy is the one who keeps waiting and reaches 1,335 days. But you go your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of days you will arise to receive your portion. So it's speaking of resurrection. It's speaking of the age to come. And ultimately, there are 1,290 days from the abomination moving forward. So the worst part of it is 1,290 days. Okay? That's kind of what it alludes to. 1,335 days in. All right. That's going to be... Happy is the one who makes it to that, because evidently something takes place, right? And we could look at Daniel 9. We could look at a lot of different scriptures. I basically just want to go to Thessalonians at this point and close this down, because there is a lot of, I could just go on for hours and hours. I just want to bring this to a close, but that Paul basically affirms the same concepts. We find Paul's thoughts on this in 1 Thessalonians and 2nd. I'm just going to read 2nd. You guys can look up what he's talking about in 1st. But what we read here is in chapter 2. Now we ask you, brothers and sisters, concerning the coming of the Lord and Messiah and the gathering and our gathering together to him, not to get shaken out of mind or disturbed, either by spirit or word or letter, as if through us, as though the day of the Lord has come. Let no one deceive you in any way. Paul is laying down some rules that I think are very important to understand. Now, and you have to understand, in Paul's time, there's not, this is a Jerusalem-led era, okay? This is a Jewish apostle-led era. Very important if you want to understand what Paul is alluding to here, okay? The day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, right? So in Daniel 11, this whole rebellion, there's a rebellion coming, right? And the man of lawlessness is revealed, the one destined to be destroyed, which is Daniel. We just read about this lawless one, okay? Now, what does lawless mean in the context of the Jewish world? It means somebody who doesn't keep the law, somebody who's against the covenant, who is anti. Now, he is lawless. What does he do? He opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he sits in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. So this is ultimately what the false Messiah, the real lawless one, the son of perdition, the rebellious one, is going to do in the last days. He's going to declare himself to be God. And he's going to sit in Jerusalem on the throne of David, and he's going to sit in the temple, which is Jesus' throne. It's what is his. And I believe that this is alluding to false Messiah is going to lead the real Messiah to come back and to claim his throne, because God at that point says, I'm done. All right, this is it. No more. And then he says this, don't you remember that when I was with you, I was telling you these things, and you know what now holds back for him to be revealed in his own time? Could be alluding to the whole Michael restraining, etc. For the mystery of lawlessness is already operating. Only there is one who holds back just now until he is taken out of the way. Again, could be alluding to Michael. Then the lawless one will be revealed. The Lord Yeshua will slay him with the breath of his mouth and wipe him out with the appearance of his coming, the cloud rider. And you read that in Habakkuk 3. The coming of the lawless one is connected to the activity of Satan, with all power, signs, and false wonders, and with every kind of wicked deception for those who are perishing. They perish because they did not accept the love of the truth so as to be saved. For this reason, God sends them a delusional force to lead them to believe what is false, so that they might be judged. Now, here's what's interesting. When he says this, that they might believe what is false, what is Jesus' primary warnings to the apostles? to not believe in false messiahs and false prophets. In the context of the message and the worldview around that conversation, you're probably dealing with Israelite/Jewish related sources here. I'm not saying that this is all Jewish, right? I'm just saying that there is an evil that is going to be coming, and it could be connected. It could be Jewish, a Jewish delusion of some sort. Not saying I have the answers. I'm just giving you context of what Paul alludes to. Okay. But it's again connected. It's the same things that he says here with the power of the signs and the false wonders, that it is a false messianic figure. Okay. Whether he is a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or a Buddhist, he's a false messianic figure who will ultimately lead people away from the covenant, away from the Bible, and he will declare himself to be God in the temple of God. And that is that's the line in the sand, which will cause Jesus to come back. Okay. And Jesus will slay him with the breath of his mouth. For this reason, God sends them in delusional force to lead them to believe what is false, so that they may judge all those who do not believe in the truth, but delighted in wickedness. Okay. So at the end of the day, I'm going to draw this to a close. I'm 51 minutes into this. So at the end of the day, when you look at this, I believe there's several important things to understand. First of all, this is Jerusalem centric. He is focusing on the leadership surrounding the temple. There is a Judeo connection here. Okay. There is some kind of something with covenant related to Israel. There are outsiders that come in seemingly at one with whatever is operating at that point as far as in the Israel, and then turns on them and is ultimately shown to be the son of perdition. Okay. And it's connected to the activity of Satan. But at the same time, this connection is called false messiahs and false prophets. And according to the book of Revelation, it's an individual, right? It's a false antichrist, or it's an antichrist and a false prophet who come, which is messianic language. You have a Messiah and you have a prophet. Jesus had Elijah and himself, and this is the Elijah who needs to come. You know, for a false prophet, you also or for a false Messiah, you also have to have a false Elijah. So the whole false messianic connection cannot be dismissed. Okay. Now, what religion or ethnicity, the Bible doesn't give us enough details, but we just know it's Jerusalem centric. And we know ultimately it culminates in the abomination of desolation. There's trouble for 1260 days or 90 days. And then there is relief. That's what we know. And it says that when we see these things come to pass, when I believe the temple is built, when Jerusalem is surrounded with armies, when this great trouble takes place from the king of the north and the south and Israel being caught in the middle somehow, then we know we're getting close. Those are the signs of the last days. It's not everything else related. Okay. Everything else, the trouble that exists in this world is totally secondary to when those signs appear. When those signs come, the abomination, desolation, Jerusalem's, surrounded with armies, false messiahs, false prophets, distortion of the covenant, and killing of people who believe in the truth. All right, these are the signs. And it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be unprecedented, but it will lead to the end of this age and the culmination of the age to come. That is what we wait for. That is the blessed hope that we have, not for the trouble, but for what is on the other side when we inherit our eternal lives, when we are given our inheritance and when we rule and reign with Jesus on the earth as he predicted. Blessings to you guys. I hope this was an encouragement to you, and happily answer any questions. If you have some, put some in the thread. Let's have a discussion. And that's it.